So today for Goals Question Time, I have the pleasure of being joined by Stephen Heller from Alpha QVC. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Andrew. Very nice to meet you.
Very good to have a talk with you again. We spoke a few weeks ago about your fund and about how AI is being used and that within the investment sort of sphere. So it's really good that you've come on to share your perspectives and that with our podcast. So it'd be great if you could introduce yourself first, please, and Alpha Q,
Sure.
give us some great context.
Yes, sure. So, I've been in venture for about 15 years and used to be a founder, built multiple tech companies that are also exited. And over the years, started to become an angel investor. And through angel investing, I had to learn a little bit the hard way that investing in venture is very hard to scale. Yeah, you end up with a lot of deal flow. A lot of portfolio work afterwards. And so we wanted to create a more diversified product. And that's how we created AQVC, Alpha Q Venture Capital, which is a VC fund of fund structured as an evergreen. So we do invest in venture capital funds, and we do that out of an evergreen structure where we are constantly raising and constantly investing, and that makes us very active. Yeah? And that means obviously we have to deal with a lot of amazing funds that reach out to us that we also source ourselves. But there are 14,000 venture capital funds in the world. Every year there are new ones being created. And then also we don't see ourselves as just passive investors. We also want to know the startups underneath. So now you can see that with our portfolio right now of 23 funds, we already have over 400 underlying startups. Again, all of these problems are data problems, and they can be solved with AI, in my point of view. So that's why I'm super interested to talk more about this today.
Excellent. No, that's great, Stephen. And yeah, your background, maybe not at your sort of scale, but I've got experience in being a founder and being a founding member of an angel network. And
Yes.
particularly over the 20 years that I've been involved in sort of tech and how it changes business, this wave of AI, generative AI now changes the dynamic from just machine learning and data sort of driven stuff to changing the interaction. So it's great to discuss what we've been doing and your views on it. So what do you think is the current state of sort of AI being used in investment analysis? What sort of things are you seeing on a
Yeah.
day-to-day basis?
Look, I mean, this is a very difficult question because I have no idea when people will listen to this recording, and I don't know what will even happen next week, right? When we just looked at the last 2 years since like ChatGPT really launched, the progress has been phenomenal, right? I've never seen a technology across the board, across the world, to be adopted that quickly. When you look at AI from a investment standpoint or how we look at it, you kind of have four layers. You have the foundational infrastructure, which is the compute, then you have the LLMs, then you have a sort of integration layer of APIs and things like that. And then you have the application layer. And we are only slowly starting to touch the application layer today, right? I think initially everybody was like, oh, it's just a wrapper, but actually it's accepted, right? Because every SaaS company is maybe just a wrapper of an AWS instance, right? You can always think of it like this. I think it's so interesting that now we are seeing more and more as any enterprise SaaS process is being disrupted with AI companies right now. Yeah, and this is not just in the investment space, because suddenly we are not just able to leverage AI for a solution, for solving a problem, but we also see that you can use AI to build stuff. Yeah, so suddenly it makes sense to build solutions in very niche areas and very small markets that technically, historically at least, have not been that attractive. Where normal SaaS companies have always tried to find the largest addressable market in big ecosystems, and suddenly with AI. You can build software relatively easy and cheaply, but be very, very focused on a certain problem and use case, and thereby deliver more value to the client. Yeah? And I think that is super exciting. I also see that there's an interesting dynamic happening right now in the price findings around AI. So you can see that now with AI, the software pricing has to change significantly because you can't just price it based on users anymore. because you suddenly have COGS, you have actual costs behind it, and then you have value of a process that is actually, in some instances, can be extremely valuable if it's done correctly. Yes, especially in an investment process. The people are expensive, talent is expensive, time is of the essence, and so the better I can deliver a solution and outcome using a technology that leverages AI, the more I could technically charge for that. Yeah, and I think this is also very interesting. That we are seeing a lot of innovation around value-based pricing, a lot around the experiences. And last but not least, I also see a big opportunity for a more consultative sales approach. When you look historically at some of the largest enterprise software firms like SAP, Oracle, etc., or Salesforce even, there's an extremely large service industry around them with agencies and implementation partners. And I think with AI, you'll see similar behavior in the enterprise space, where already clients were a little bit overwhelmed introducing SaaS and cloud-based solutions to their teams. And now with AI-based solutions, it's even more of a challenge to implement them properly and to maintain custom solutions. So I think that there's also a interesting dynamic where we see like agency software building models significantly change right now.
Wow, you packed a lot in there, Stephen. I'm certainly seeing a lot of that and that as well. So picking out just a few of the points just to reflect back as what you're saying. I agree as well. The speed of the technology change is phenomenal. I've been running AI workshops to introduce people to the technology and stuff, and I started that just over 2 years ago. And I did one of those programs on Monday and just going through an update in the slide deck
Yeah.
and seeing what it was like 2 years ago, and then reflecting what the systems and that can do now. And I did one sort of look up. It was one comment that I saw online was saying that the computing capabilities now is doubling about every 100 days,
Yeah.
and people don't get their head around that exponential growth, right? Is it? Because like 2 years
Yeah.
ago, that's doubled 3 times during the year. So
Yeah.
2, 4, 16,
Yeah.
32, 64,
Yeah.
100, it's 128 times more powerful at the end of 2 years than what it was at the
Yeah.
beginning of the first year. And it's going to keep doubling, is what we're still sort of seeing. And then, as you said, the business models and the value for the implementation. So in terms of the AI platform for investment that we're sort of looking at, we sort of take your typical VC, which might have 1,000 applications each year. When the corporates that I deal with, they say they're not looking at 80% of them.
Yeah.
And then when they do look at them, one VC I sat with earlier this week, they said, well, one of their investment analysts took them 2 weeks and it took 3 iterations for them
Yeah.
to do the review of the report of that investment sort of thing. And the AI now that we're sort of seeing can create those sort of things within minutes, and you can interact in that with it. So, and I agree with you that just doing that on a per seat basis doesn't really capture the power of these things to be able to be constantly updating the information and querying with the entrepreneurs, querying with the market. So I agree. So how would you see then some of these things being deployed? Because I think you've raised quite a few of the questions about whether you do it as a SaaS model, whether you do it as a consulting model, and sort of stuff like that. But how are you seeing it, or how do you recommend maybe to the funds that you invest in, where
Yeah.
you say how are you saying challenging them to say how they be more effective?
Yeah, I think it's always you can look at it from a value chain standpoint, where when you go through a flow of an, now mostly talk about venture, but again, this is also true for private equity and other
Yeah,
kind of verticals. You have a sourcing and selection element, and you have kind of the investment process in itself, and then you have value creation and portfolio management across that value chain. Yeah, I think at the end of the day, venture, especially in the earliest stages, is still a human-driven process. Yeah, so I think we are not yet in a world where the AI will take the investment decision or will actually build the relationship with the best founders, because this is still a relationship game. This is still the top companies are they can choose who they take money from. They want to trust a partner. They want to get to know a firm. And so I think the best way an AI can currently support is by kind of finding the needle in the haystack quicker than your competitors can do, right? So it's impossible to kind of look at every company, and there's probably, it's an outlier style industry. There's a whole long tail of startups that probably doesn't deserve funding. But there are always these gold nuggets that we see also, that maybe are not the straight up obvious best company directly, right? So it may not, there may not be directly a top name, top branded angel investor, maybe a very young team, whatever, right? So there's all these reasons why somebody may get overlooked. And I think that's where AI can take out some of the kind of filters that currently exist and improve that these companies have a way to explain themselves outside of their pitch deck, thereby cutting down analyst time, right? If an analyst has to jump on a call, introduce the fund, listen to the uh, sort of reverse pitch, then ask some clarifying question, that's an hour that you will not get back, right? That's already, right? And I think this is where, in these like initial calls, intro calls, you can use the AI to automate a lot of that, especially for the non-clear outliers, right? There are sometimes clear outliers that you just want to get on the phone. Then there's long tail that you don't want to even look at and care about. And then there are these ones in the 50 shades of gray somewhere, where you actually have extremely interesting companies, but also funds, right? Generally, the opportunities are there. Yeah. And that's, I think, where I can comment on the sourcing and selection element to really help you identify these companies faster. And then again, I think it comes back on the portfolio management side, right? So when you actually have a portfolio, just to crunch the numbers, to update investor reportings, to consolidate KPIs, to kind of be able to validate some of that data, to run a constant sanity check against the numbers. I think all of this kind of work is something that an AI can do perfectly, while you can focus on your role as a board member or as an active investor, making intros, helping the company with value creation, hiring, or fundraising.
Yeah, excellent. No, great. Yeah, and I'm just picking up a couple of points there. I think, yeah, what we've seen is when we've been showing our system to angel investors and funds and showing them the reports and then picking up the AI identifying questions to ask the entrepreneur, because you can't expect everything to be covered in the pitch deck and all
Yeah.
that. So having those questions that the human person in the fund or angel could ask, but also we've tried it with an avatar and a voice interaction.
Yeah.
And the feedback that we've had from the entrepreneurs and from the investors are great. I wouldn't have thought of asking that question. And the way that the person answered it and all that is much more engaging than typing and sort of stuff like that.
Mm.
I would push back or give you a challenge though, in that my view, and I've written an article about this, would be that a fund, like the large corporates that I deal with, typically don't invest less than 5 million sort of type thing, right? My challenge or view would be at the moment that they could take one of those 5 million and do 50, 100,000 investments, and the AI could do all of that. And because the AI can do that validation, do that sort of selection, and then while you're in that business, then as a small investor, you then could be tracking them and sort of saying, okay, right, have they met their metrics? What's the feedback from the other investors who are more involved on
Mm.
a day-to-day basis? So thinking about changing the business model, which I think gives the larger funds, or particularly the corporates that I typically work with, gets them involved earlier in the ecosystem, and
Mm.
and also helps to pump that early angel sort of system. So I'm often thinking about how AI can change the business model in a sector, rather than, yes, I agree with you, all of those automation improvements in the process part, but might we see a step change? So that's my sort of provocative view. Do you think that's sensible, or it's not quite there yet, or it won't work?
Look, it depends, right? I think that generally in venture land, there are kind of two train of thoughts. The predominant one is that they want a concentrated portfolio and start build relationships very early. And then there's more an indexing logic on the other hand. Indexing ones, they still have to prove their numbers. I think overall, it's a hardcore outlier driven business, yeah, where averages just lose money. Yeah. And so to really be in the best companies is not that easy. And it's not just a digital decision where you can look at metrics or even a person. It's network, it's reference calls, it's kind of it's a very very human success of a founder. That yes, the AI can to a certain extent, right? When you look at recruitment tools or so, where AIs are also able to do really strong personality profiles. But I believe it's very difficult, right? And on the other hand, I also think that for corporates, to do that at scale, right, you end up with a large portfolio that you then at some point maybe not want to manage anymore, right? I've seen this many times that strategies change. Somebody still, even if you do these 5 million into small companies, somebody at the CFO office still has to kind of consolidate it, look at it, look at the reportings. There's still a compliance element to it, and they will say, why am I spending 80% of my time for less than 1% of my assets, right? So at some point they'll be like, okay, leave me alone with this little startup stuff. We rather do proper things where we actually focus on, where we can do the value creation, where we can insource the innovation, right? For corporates, the investment is rarely a financial incentive where they want diversification and just like financial returns. They want strategic upsides. They want to train their employees to be more entrepreneurial, more innovative, want to push the envelope on that. And that's, I think, only doable if you do very concentrated bets. Yeah.
Okay. No, no, fair points on all of those perspectives. Fair points. So where are you seeing the sort of resistance or adoption barriers now in getting funds and entrepreneurs to shift to some of these capabilities that we're seeing?
Look, I think everybody is playing with it, right? Depends on who you talk to. The funds that are more technical, they try to build their own internal solutions. They're playing with it. They're building themselves on either on creating their own GPTs, on creating things with tools like Lovable, with Cursor. There's a lot of very cool AI tools now out there where semi-technical or technical interested people, which VCs often are, and also the juniors that work in a VC fund, and they are starting to play with these kind of tools, right? Will they create perfect solutions? I don't know. I think there's a case to be made around specialization. So let's see who is kind of winning it. We do see hundreds of companies in the space, so the barriers to entry are super low. But a lot of them, again, I think they have a mispricing, so they are not really making money. If you're selling a license for $25 a month or something like this, and you have to pay ChatGPT behind it or whatever, Anthropic or any of the big LLMs, um, you're not really going to make money with that. Yeah, so that will take a very long time. And so let's see, right, who will win the race, right? I think there's another element that is not talked about that much is the sovereignty element. Yeah, so in the past, it was very easy to build global tech companies from the US, so the US tech was adopted very quickly. But now with AI and the kind of everybody understands the value of their own data, yeah, whether and their own processes, and so everybody is becoming more and more sensitive to, okay, where's my data really? Is it really used to be trained? Where is it really hosted? There's lots of trust elements that I think right now people are waking up to, especially in the corporate context, because there are more workshops, there's more training happening, the employees are getting more aware that they shouldn't just take their entire confidential work information and put it into a free version of ChatGPT. That is maybe not the smartest idea. And so I think there's a whole awareness there of like, okay, how do I create actually lower middle market enterprise solutions that work on a sovereign level, where the pricing is not that I have a business continuity risk, because I think this is also important that you're actually looking for long-term solutions. And yeah, I don't see a clear winner yet. Yeah? So it's right now there's everything seems to be still open, but we see some very very fast growing companies. So some of the personal assistant email writing tools, note taking tools, and so forth, they are growing like crazy, and a lot of them are growing also significantly in the VC cosmos, because obviously you have a lot of meetings, you need to take a lot of notes, you write a lot of emails. So all these automation tools in that space, and that's not even touching yet the investment process significantly, is we see huge growth of some of these companies.
Yeah. No, very much agree there. That I think that experimentation point has maybe stopped in a lot of cases now, has hit the point where they've got to become commercial, they've got to become more processed, they've got to understand where their data is being held. I think that's a really important sort of point. So I've said in a number of forums that I've been involved in that technology now really isn't the issue. It's the data, it's the process, it's the business model, and it's how people are going to change in a lot of
Yeah.
those cases. I think that's going to be super important.
Yeah.
Um,
I think also to your point, right? I think another big element that is not yet 100% solved is the yeah, interface, right? So where does AI really live, right? I mean, we see a lot of tools that basically create a new CRM. So you kind of have another CRM basically where there are a bit of AI features built in. And then there are some tools where the AI is fully hidden. It's all behind the scenes in your email and your calendar, but you don't have an audit log. You don't know why it's taking a decision like this, right? And then you have basically the chat GPT or whatever the chat interface style solutions, which again, very rarely are good for process work. Yeah. So I'm very not I don't find any of the UI UX solutions yet that innovative yet for the new world we are moving into, right? So I find it super interesting right now to not just look at the rise of the power of LLMs and now the move to more agentic and deep reasoning models, but also how the interfaces are actually changing with and where do the solutions actually live? Are we talking about adopting new platforms? Every VC has their existing CRM, they have their existing solutions, whether it's a CRM or an Airtable or any of these kind of tools. Can you just wrap a third-party AI on top of it? Do you need to replace an existing technology? How is the interface if you're switching also now more and more towards a mobile-driven deal flow management world where pitch decks are just shared via WhatsApp? You know, a lot of stuff happens on mobile. Obviously, when you tried the Apple built-in AI in Siri, it's terrible. But you know, how do you think about this new way of working and how does AI to fully integrate there? I'm very curious to see how that plays out. So again, from an investor standpoint, amazing that there are so many companies trying to chase that. From a client standpoint, I still haven't found the interface I'm totally in love with.
yeah. No, very much agree. Very much agree on that. But yeah, I suppose from my perspective, I break them down because I agree with the same sort of sentiment about at the moment I'm trying to break it down into thinking about the process. As we said about the deal flow earlier, about selection, doing more analysis, the interaction with the
Yeah,
entrepreneur. I'm almost taking those as almost like separate people stroke separate processes and do well, okay, well, let's think about how the AI or how the humans do or don't do it at the moment, and let's think how AI can work that. And then how do we create the reports and where do we store them and how do we the interface bit, like when we talked about the AI coming up with some questions, how you get that feedback from the entrepreneur is, do you send them an email, ask them to fill it out, or
yeah,
do you have an audio interaction with them on WhatsApp with the AI, asking the question and response, or do you have an avatar? So train my avatar. But I agree with you then. The key thing is that data has to get back into some sort of database. And is it the current
mm,
CRM system or is it somewhere else? And then also, I think the challenge comes back to what I think one of the points you touched on earlier is now the AI can analyze all of that data. How does it come up with some of the answers that it comes up with? Because
yeah,
when I pointed the AI at some of my drives and asked it questions about, for example, my podcast, you've done over 200 podcasts, and I point the AI and say, write me an article about artificial intelligence or write about sustainability or female leading.
yeah.
It brings back parts from things that I'd forgotten about. And it's like, well, where did you get that from?
Yeah.
And sometimes, of course, as we know with the way AI is, sometimes it can't answer. So
Yeah, it's also making things up, right? So
yeah,
sometimes, right? So it depends a little bit on which model, on how again, prompt engineering is something that is an art in itself, right?
yeah,
So even if you're building, working in the application layer in general, right? I think most companies will be in that layer, right? Most companies will either be in the application layer or in the API layer. The LLM layer is a race to the bottom of the ocean. So again, this is none of them will win. And you see with DeepSeek and the kind of advancements they've done, even if it costs 10 times as much as they claim it costs, it's still much, much cheaper than what OpenAI paid for it, right? So
exactly.
it's phenomenal what they've achieved. And now the race is really on, right? So and this is a race that you as a normal startup or even anyone, you can't win. This is a race on a sovereign level where, Abu Dhabi, the Americans, the big billionaires are, they're trying to win this race on the LLM side. But at the end, it will be open source. It will be very cheap to utilize that. The compute power is growing, but again, this is heavy infrastructure investing. This is also not something that is very easy to do, and so everything will happen in that application layer. Yeah, and I think there, as you said, right, are you gonna be the system of action? Are you going to be the system of record? Are the system of today the system of records like the CRMs going to add the system of action, the AIs on top of it? How are they dealing with hallucinations? How are they dealing with the internal the dozens of prompts when you look at a process of an agentic workflow, which you can break down into micro
Yeah, yeah,
LLM interactions. So you're starting to, okay, I don't know, right? This is why everything we're saying right now in 3 months may look completely different with a new release of Anthropic or OpenAI solutions. And I think it's very important for founders right now, if they're working on this, to be LLM agnostic and to be very
yeah,
quick in adjusting. Yeah, this is, I think,
yeah.
important to kind of continue to be on the ball of the current cutting edge of the underlying innovations, where at the end, we are also seeing very interesting dynamics now when it just comes to crawling of websites or OCR, right? These two things are very crucial for AI to work properly because you obviously need to ingest a lot of information from PowerPoints, or PDFs or different
Yeah, yeah.
websites and stuff like this, which again is still where the AI starts to become lazy if it's not set up correctly, right? So it only reads the first slide and then the rest is kind of
Yeah,
guesstimated
yeah, yeah.
and stuff like this. Yeah, so it's kind of funny to observe that.
We know, don't we, Steve? But I think also going back to the start of this conversation about different types of funds, different types of people, different types of behavior. I think like we could be having a similar discussion about, I'm a founder and I've sent my pitch deck in. Now, why did that fund not like it? Why, the person that read it didn't like the picture on the first page and whatever, and said, "Oh, I'm not going to bother with that one." So I
Yeah.
don't think we should necessarily say that AI is any worse or better
No, it's
than
this
the
is
than the human process, and that isn't it.
yeah.
It's
100%. The human process also is heavily biased in most cases, right? I think it's always if you're getting cold decks, then most funds read almost every email, but it's also they don't have the time to respond. The founder doesn't usually know why they got rejected or didn't hear back. Um, and all of that to create more transparency there, to be able to ingest faster the kind of absolute top startups and companies, to find kind of the needle in the haystack where you see, okay, there's ambiguity. I need to clarify information, but there are great companies and great deals to be made. And then there's a long tail that, may not deserve the funding, but they deserve feedback. They want to improve as entrepreneurs. They want to get, learn and grow. And so to also get them an answer that is not like, says nothing, or, like in
yeah,
recruitment, you can't really give a candidate feedback anymore
yeah, yeah.
because it's all can be wrongly interpreted. I hope we will not move into that space in investing, right? Because you really want to tell the founder why you didn't get back to them, and even if that feedback is written by an AI, that can be helpful to them.
Yeah, no, very much so. And certainly the Angel Network that I'm a founding member of is, it's based at a Henley Business School. And we pride ourselves as angel investors to try and give and support to these next wave of entrepreneurs, and it's great. Fine, they get knocked back, but then we see them come back 6 months, a year, or 18 months later with, "Oh, right, I've done this now, and I've
Yeah.
learned," and they've got some traction. So I think it's really important for us to do that, and I think the learning capabilities out of AI, as you said, when you train it and prompt it and that appropriately, can give great feedback and support for investors and for founders. Stephen, thank you so much. It's been really stimulating discussion that with you, and I think the people that listen to our podcast and sort of see us will be wowed and give them a great deal of thought for this. And I'm sure we'll go back and reflect on it in 6 months, a year, 2 years' time, and sort of say, "God, do you remember when we talked about how AI was back in 2025?" So thank you very much for
Exactly.
giving some
Thank you, Andrew, so
perspective on
much.
that now. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you.